The notification on Claire's phone didn't make a sound. It just lit up the marble countertop like a silent alarm, shattering the perfect stillness of their Tuesday evening. It wasn't the content of the message that broke Ethan, but the timestamp, 11:43 p.m., and the intimacy of a name that shouldn't have been there. In that split second, the beautiful architecture of their 10-year marriage didn't just crack, it evaporated, leaving him standing in the debris of a life he thought he knew. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet devastation of secrets revealed and the hard, lonely road to finding oneself again, stay with me. There are truths hidden in the shadows of this story that we need to uncover together. The notification on the iPhone screen didn't scream, it didn't even vibrate. It simply bloomed into existence, a small rectangle of light against the granite darkness of the kitchen island. Ethan Vance had only come out for a glass of water. The Chicago wind was howling against the floor-to-ceiling windows of their 22nd floor condo, a sound that usually made him feel secure, encased in the expensive fortress he and Claire had built. Now the wind sounded like a warning. He looked down. The phone belonged to Claire. She had left it face up, a careless mistake born of 3 years of his blind trust. Julian, client. He's asleep, right? I can't stop thinking about your taste. Tonight was intense. Ethan stood there, the cold glass of water sweating in his hand. The words didn't make sense at first. They were just shapes, pixels. But then the name registered. Julian, the developer, the man who had been at their dinner table 2 weeks ago, pouring wine, laughing at Ethan's jokes about city zoning laws, shaking Ethan's hand with a grip that was firm and dry. Tonight. Claire had said she was showing a penthouse in the Loop. She had come home at 10:30 p.m., smelling of rain and expensive vanilla perfume, complaining about traffic. She had kissed Ethan on the cheek, her lips cool, and gone straight to the shower. Ethan placed the water glass on the counter. He didn't throw it. He didn't scream. He felt a strange, terrifying calm wash over him, a numbness that started in his fingertips and seized his chest. It was the feeling of a structural failure. When a support beam snaps, there is a split second of silence before the ceiling comes down. He walked past the kitchen, down the hallway lined with black and white photos of their trips to Tuscany and Aspen. He entered the bedroom. Claire was asleep, her breathing rhythmic and soft, her blonde hair fanned out over the silk pillowcase. She looked innocent. She looked like the woman he had promised to protect. He watched her for a full minute, waiting for rage to set in. But rage required energy, and Ethan felt drained, hollowed out by the sudden realization that the woman in the bed was a stranger. He turned to the walk-in closet. He didn't pack a suitcase. The sound of the zipper would wake her. Instead, he grabbed his gym bag. He threw in 3 days' worth of underwear, 2 shirts, his laptop, and the toiletry kit he kept ready for business trips. He moved with the precision of a thief in his own home. He walked back to the living room, took his keys from the bowl, and looked at the condo one last time. The sleek Italian leather sofa, the abstract art they had bought at an auction, the panoramic view of the skyline. It all looked like a stage set now, props for a play that had just been canceled. He took the elevator down to the garage. His Audi sat next to her white Range Rover. He got in, the leather seat cold against his back. As he drove out of the building, turning onto Lakeshore Drive, he didn't head toward the nicer hotels downtown. He couldn't bear the thought of a concierge asking him how his evening was, or the bright, judgmental lights of a lobby. He needed somewhere dark, somewhere anonymous. He drove west, away from the lake, away from the money. He drove until the luxury high-rises gave way to industrial warehouses and strip malls. 40 minutes later, he pulled into the cracked asphalt lot of the Starlight Motor Inn. The neon sign buzzed with a dying electrical hum, the letter M flickering violently. It was a place for truckers, for people between paychecks, for mistakes. Ethan cut the engine. The rain had started again, drumming on the roof of the car. He looked at the motel office, a small box of yellow light in the darkness. He had credit cards with limits higher than the value of this entire building, yet he felt like he belonged here. He grabbed his bag and stepped out into the cold rain. He didn't look back at the city. He didn't check his phone. He just walked toward the flickering neon, ready to disappear. Room 114 smelled of lemon industrial cleaner, and stale tobacco, a scent that seemed baked into the peeling beige wallpaper. Ethan lay on top of the bedspread, fully dressed in the suit trousers and dress shirt he had worn the night before. He hadn't slept. He had spent the last 6 hours watching the water stain on the ceiling darken as the rain outside refused to let up. The sun was up now, or at least the gray-filtered light of a Chicago morning was trying to push through the heavy curtains. On the bedside table, his phone buzzed again. It had been buzzing every 15 minutes since 6 a.m. Ethan turned his head slowly to look at it. The screen lit up with Claire's name. It wasn't a photo. He had removed her picture hours ago. Just the white text against a black background. Claire. Ethan, this is ridiculous. Where are you? Claire. The car is gone. Did you go to the site early? Pick up. Claire. I'm calling the police if you don't answer in 10 minutes. He watched the screen go dark again. She didn't know that he knew. In her mind, he was just a husband who had inexplicably vanished, a deviation from the script she had written for them. That was the thing about Claire. She wasn't worried about his safety as much as she was annoyed by the disruption to her schedule. Ethan sat up, his joints stiff. He walked to the window and pulled back the curtain an inch. The motel parking lot was a landscape of gray slush and puddles. A semi-truck rumbled past on the adjacent highway, shaking the thin glass of the window. He felt a strange sense of vertigo. Yesterday, he had been discussing sustainable drainage systems for a multi-million-dollar park project. Today, he was standing in a roadside motel, afraid to brush his teeth because the sink looked questionable. He opened his bag and took out the laptop, but didn't turn it on. Instead, he sat in the single, wobbly armchair in the corner. His mind began to rewind, bypassing the text message from last night and landing on memories he had previously filed away as insignificant. He remembered the dinner party 2 weeks ago. Julian had been there, sitting across from Claire. Ethan had been telling a story about a contractor, and everyone was laughing, except Claire and Julian. They were looking at each other. It wasn't a sexual gaze, not overtly. It was a look of shared amusement, a private frequency that Ethan couldn't tune into. He had thought they were bored. Now he knew they were communicating in a language he didn't speak. A sharp knock on the door made him flinch. Housekeeping, a muffled voice called out. No, Ethan said, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat. No service. You got to check out by 11, honey, or pay for another night. Ethan stood up and walked to the door. He opened it just enough to slide a credit card through the crack to the woman standing there. She was older, her face lined with the kind of exhaustion that comes from a lifetime of cleaning up after other people. I'm staying, Ethan said, for the week. The woman took the card, looking him up and down, his wrinkled white shirt, the Rolex on his wrist, the hollow look in his eyes. She didn't ask questions. People at the Starlight didn't ask questions. I'll run it, she said, turning away. Ethan closed the door and locked it. He went back to the bed and finally picked up his phone. He didn't answer Claire's calls. Instead, he did something final. He navigated to the settings and turned off Share My Location. The severance was quiet, digital, and absolute. He tossed the phone onto the other pillow, the empty space where a wife should have been, and lay back down, waiting for the silence to crush him. By Wednesday, room 114 had transformed into a grotesque parody of a corporate office. Ethan sat at the small laminate desk, his laptop propped up on a stack of phone books he found in the drawer. He was wearing a crisp Oxford shirt and a blazer, but below the desk, he was still in his boxers and socks. The grading on the north slope needs to be reconsidered, Ethan said into his headset, his voice steady, professional. If we don't adjust for the runoff, the foundation will compromise within 5 years. On the screen, 3 junior architects nodded in unison, sitting in the bright, glass-walled conference room of his firm downtown. They had no idea that behind Ethan, just out of the camera's frame, was a bed with a cigarette burn in the quilt and a bathroom that smelled of mildew. A siren wailed from the highway outside, loud and piercing. Ethan slammed his finger onto the mute button instantly, holding his breath until the sound faded. Sorry, he said, unmuting. Bad connection. I'm working remotely this week. Family matter. Take all the time you need, Ethan, his partner Marcus said from the screen. We've got the ground team handled. Ethan ended the call and immediately stripped off the blazer, throwing it onto the pile of clothes on the armchair. The performance was exhausting. He felt like an actor stepping off stage, the adrenaline crashing into fatigue. He opened a new tab on his browser. He knew he shouldn't do it. It was a form of self-harm, picking at a scab that hadn't even begun to heal. But the silence in the room was too loud, and his curiosity was a physical itch. He typed Instagram.com and logged into a burner account he used for competitor research. He navigated to Claire's profile. She had posted 3 hours ago. It was a photo from 2 years ago, a golden hour shot of them in Martha's Vineyard. In the picture, Ethan was looking at the ocean, and Claire was looking at the camera, her smile radiant, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. It was the image of a perfect, supportive partnership. Ethan read the caption, and his blood ran cold. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is step back and breathe. Sending all my love and support to my husband as he takes some much-needed time away to focus on his mental health. Burnout is real, guys. Please respect our privacy while he recharges. Waiting for you, E. Mental health awareness. Shocked her unconditional love. Ethan stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. It was brilliant. It was diabolical. In one paragraph, she had explained his disappearance, garnered sympathy for herself as the supportive, long-suffering wife, and preemptively discredited anything he might say in the future. If he came back and accused her of cheating, she could paint it as a symptom of his breakdown. If he filed for divorce, she would look like the victim abandoned during a crisis. She wasn't worried about him. She was managing the PR of their separation. She was curating the narrative so that Julian, and her reputation, remained invisible. The sadness that had been weighing on Ethan's chest for the last 48 hours began to evaporate. It was replaced by something harder, something useful. He looked at the comments. "You're such a rock, Claire. Hope Ethan feels better soon. He's lucky to have you." He laughed, a dry, sharp sound that bounced off the thin walls. He closed the laptop with a snap. He had been hiding in this motel because he felt broken, because he felt like he had lost. But looking at that photo, he realized he hadn't just lost a wife. He had been living with a strategist. Ethan stood up and walked to the mirror. He looked tired. His stubble was growing and thick and dark. He looked like the man Claire was describing, unstable, fraying at the edges. "Okay," he whispered to the empty room. "You want to play the victim? Let's see how long you can keep the script running." He wasn't ready to go back. Not yet. But he was done mourning a marriage that had apparently been a marketing campaign for her. He went to the mini fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and sat by the window. He needed to watch. He needed to wait. If she was going to tell the world he was a ghost, he would become one. Ethan needed coffee, and the sludge in the motel lobby pot had finally run dry. Against his better judgment, he pulled a baseball cap low over his eyes and walked across the cracked pavement to the 24-hour gas station adjacent to the motel. It was 8 p.m. on a Thursday. The air smelled of diesel and wet asphalt. Ethan wore a hoodie he had bought at a nearby thrift store and jeans that hadn't been washed in 3 days. He kept his head down, navigating the aisles of the convenience store like a fugitive, grabbing a carton of milk and a pack of American spirits, a habit he had quit 5 years ago, but which had seemingly resurrected itself alongside his misery. He was standing in line, staring at the lottery tickets behind the counter, when a voice cut through the hum of the refrigeration units. "Ethan!" His stomach dropped. It wasn't the voice of a stranger. It was familiar, baritone, and confused. Ethan froze. He considered ignoring it, paying cash and walking out. But the hand landed on his shoulder before he could move. He turned around. Standing there holding a 6-pack of craft beer and looking utterly bewildered was Greg. Greg was a general contractor Ethan had worked with on the Riverside Plaza project, a man who respected Ethan for his precision and his refusal to cut corners. "Jesus, it is you," Greg said, his eyes scanning Ethan's disheveled appearance. The stubble, the cheap hoodie, the stark contrast to the tailored suits he usually saw Ethan wearing. Ethan forced a tight smile. "Hey, Greg, I didn't expect to see you out this way," Greg stammered. He looked out the window at the motel across the lot, then back at Ethan. The connection was made instantly. Greg wasn't stupid. He knew what the Starlight Motor Inn was. Just taking a break, Ethan said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. Greg's expression softened into something resembling pity. Right. Yeah, I saw Claire's post about the burnout. Taking time for your mental health. That's good, man. Seriously. The industry is a grinder. It takes a toll. Ethan felt a muscle in his jaw twitch. Claire's post. It was working. Even Greg, a no-nonsense guy who built skyscrapers, had bought the narrative that Ethan was the fragile one. The one who had cracked under pressure. Greg shifted uncomfortably. So you staying over there? You want to grab a real drink? Or I can drive you home. You look like you've had a rough couple of days. The offer was kind, but it was wrapped in a layer of condensation that humiliated Ethan. Greg thought he was having a nervous breakdown. He thought Ethan was hiding in a motel because he couldn't handle his job, not because his wife was sleeping with a client. Ethan looked at the pack of cigarettes in his hand. He looked at the neon sign of the motel reflecting in the wet pavement outside. He thought about Claire in their pristine condo, crafting her captions, controlling the story. If he agreed with Greg, he was validating Claire's lie. Ethan straightened his posture. He took off the baseball cap and ran a hand through his unkempt hair, looking Greg directly in the eye. The shame evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I'm not burnt out, Greg, Ethan said, his voice low but steady. Oh, I just thought... I didn't leave because of the job, Ethan interrupted. I left because I'm done. I'm not going back to the condo, and I'm not going back to her. Greg went silent. The pity in his eyes shifted to shock, and then, slowly, to a grim understanding. He looked from Ethan to the motel again, seeing it not as a hideout for a crazy person, but as a bunker for a man at war. I see, Greg said quietly. He didn't ask for details. He was a guy who understood structural integrity. He knew what it looked like when a foundation had been rotted out from the inside. I'll see you on site next week, Greg, Ethan said, placing his cash on the counter. I'll be the one running the meeting. He walked out of the store, the automatic doors sliding shut behind him. He hadn't told Greg everything, but he had reclaimed the truth of his own existence. He wasn't sick. He was just awake. And for the first time in 3 days, as he walked back toward the flickering neon of the starlight, he didn't feel like hiding. The white Range Rover looked like a spaceship landed in a swamp. Its LED headlights cut through the Friday night drizzle, illuminating the cracked pavement and the rusted dumpster of the Starlight Motor Inn. Ethan was standing under the awning of his room, smoking a cigarette he didn't really want, when the car pulled up. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He just watched as the driver's side door opened and Claire stepped out. She was wearing a trench coat belted tightly at the waist and heels that were entirely unsuited for the oil-stained asphalt. She didn't look like a cheater. She looked like an angel descending into hell to save a sinner. Ethan, she breathed, her voice cracking perfectly. She rushed toward him, ignoring the puddles. She stopped 2 feet away, close enough for him to smell the vanilla and sandalwood perfume that had been the background scent of his life for 10 years. It hit him harder than the cold wind, a olfactory trigger that bypassed his logic and went straight to the part of his brain that still loved her. How did you find me? Ethan asked, his voice flat. The credit card, Ethan. We have a joint account for emergencies. Did you think I wouldn't look? Her eyes were wet, wide with a mixture of fear and accusation. You just vanished. Do you have any idea what you put me through? I thought you were dead. I thought you had crashed the car. I saw the text, Claire, he said, cutting through her panic. I saw the message from Julian. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Instead, a look of profound confusion crossed her face, as if he were speaking a foreign language. Julian? She let out a short, incredulous breath. Is that what this is? You ran away and checked into this place because of a text from Julian? He said tonight was intense. He asked if I was asleep. Because we were closing the deal on the penthouse, Ethan. It was intense. We were negotiating millions of dollars until 10 at night, and he asked if you were asleep because he knows how stressed you've been, and he didn't want to text late if it would wake you up. She stepped closer, reaching out to touch his arm. Her hand was warm. My God, Ethan, you're jealous? Of Julian? He's 50 years old. He's my client. Ethan looked at her. Her face was open, pleading. There was no guilt there, only concern. She was rewriting reality in real time, and she was doing it with such conviction that the ground beneath him began to feel unstable. Was he wrong? Had he misread the tone? The text hadn't been explicit. It hadn't said sex. It hadn't said love. Maybe he had projected his own insecurities onto a business relationship. Maybe he really was having a breakdown. Ethan started, but the words died in his throat. You're not well, Claire whispered, stroking his arm. Look at you. You're living in a motel. You're wearing dirty clothes. This isn't you, baby. This is the stress talking. Come home. Let me take care of you. We can forget this ever happened. The pull was magnetic. It would be so easy to get in the car. The heated seats, the quiet engine, the clean sheets of their bed. He could go back to being the successful architect with the beautiful wife, and all he had to do was swallow this one doubt. He could accept her version of the truth. It was a warmer, softer truth than the one he was living in. He looked at her hand on his arm. He wanted to lean into it. The loneliness of the last 3 days had been a physical ache, and she was the cure. Just come home, she urged softly. I forgive you for leaving. I forgive you. The phrase hung in the damp air. She was forgiving him. For a second, Ethan swayed toward her, but then a semi-truck blasted its horn on the highway, a harsh, dissonant sound that shattered the spell. He looked at her eyes again. Behind the tears, behind the concern, he saw a flicker of calculation. She wasn't asking him to come home because she missed him. She was asking him to come home because he was a loose end she needed to tie up. Ethan didn't pull away, but he didn't move toward the car. He stood frozen in the liminal space between the comfortable lie and the jagged truth, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. I need time, he whispered. It was a weak defense, but it was the only one he had left. The red taillights of the Range Rover dissolved into the mist of the highway, leaving Ethan standing alone in the damp cold. The silence she left behind was heavy, filled with the echo of her words. I forgive you. It was a masterstroke. For a few minutes, standing there in the rain, he had actually felt grateful. He had felt like the villain. He turned to go back into room 114, his hands shaking as he reached for the knob. She's good, kid. I'll give her that. The voice came from the shadows of the walkway. Ethan stopped. Sitting in a plastic lawn chair outside room 112, shielded by the overhang, was a man Ethan had only seen in passing. He looked to be in his 60s, his face a roadmap of hard years, wearing a flannel shirt over a grease-stained mechanic's jumpsuit. He was smoking a cigarette, the ember glowing bright orange in the gloom. Ethan didn't have the energy for small talk. Not tonight, he muttered. I'm not looking for conversation, the man said, flicking ash onto the wet pavement. Just making an observation. That was a hell of a performance. I forgive you. That's the line, isn't it? The one that hooks you right in the gut. Ethan stiffened. You were listening? Walls are thin, and you two weren't exactly whispering. The man leaned forward, the neon light from the sign catching the deep lines around his eyes. My second wife was like that. She could set the house on fire and convince you that you were the one who bought the matches. By the time she was done talking, I'd be apologizing for her affair. Ethan stared at him. The anger flared up, the instinctive defense of a husband protecting his wife. But it died instantly because he knew the man was right. The stranger had summarized in 3 sentences what Ethan had been trying to decode for 3 days. It's complicated, Ethan said weakly. It ain't, the man countered. It's real simple. She drove a $100,000 car to a $40 a night motel, not to take you home, but to make sure you didn't blow up her spot. She needs you back in the box, quiet and happy. The man took a long drag of his cigarette and exhaled a cloud of smoke that drifted toward Ethan. You go back to that, the man continued, pointing a calloused finger toward the highway, and you lose the only thing you got left, your gut. You know what you saw. You know what you felt. If you let her talk you out of your own reality, you're dead. You're just a ghost walking around in a fancy suit. Ethan looked at the man, then out at the empty parking lot. The ghost. That's exactly what he had felt like in the condo, a prop in Claire's life. The logic of the last hour crumbled. Claire's tears, her concern, her logical explanations about business meetings, it was all smoke. She hadn't come here because she loved him. She came here because she was losing control. And control was the only currency Claire truly valued. "Thanks," Ethan said. The word felt inadequate, but it was sincere. "Don't thank me," the man said, leaning back into the shadows. "Just don't get in the car next time." Ethan unlocked his door and stepped inside. The room was still ugly, still smelling of stale smoke and lemon cleaner, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a bunker. He walked to the desk and sat down. He didn't pace. He didn't cry. He opened his laptop and pulled up a new browser window. He didn't search for signs of infidelity or marriage counseling this time. He typed in a search query he had avoided for 10 years. Divorce attorneys, Chicago aggressive. He scrolled past the ads, his eyes scanning the names. He needed someone who understood war. He needed someone who could dismantle a narrative as effectively as Claire could build one. He found a number for a firm on Wacker Drive, wrote it down on the back of a Motel notepad, and set it next to his phone. He lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since Tuesday, his heart rate was slow, steady. The confusion was gone. He wasn't going back to the lie. He was going to burn it down. 3 months later, the snow had melted into the gray slush of a Chicago March. Ethan stood in the center of a studio apartment in Logan Square. It was nothing like the glass fortress in the Gold Coast. The floors were scuffed hardwood, the radiator hissed like an angry cat, and the view was of a brick alleyway. But for the first time in years, the air tasted clean. He placed his pen on the kitchen counter next to the signed lease agreement. It was done. He had spent 6 weeks in the Starlight Motor Inn, followed by a month on a friend's couch, and now he finally had a key to a door that only he controlled. The divorce papers were with his lawyer, a shark named Sarah who had effectively blocked Claire's attempts at reconciliation, forcing all communication through legal channels. Ethan felt lighter. He had lost 15 pounds, grown a beard, and stopped caring about the social circles that used to define his worth. He was designing a small community garden project, low pay, high satisfaction. He was rebuilding. He picked up a box of books to unpack, enjoying the physical weight of it. His phone buzzed on the counter. It wasn't a call. It was a text. Ethan froze. He had set a specific ringtone for his lawyer, and this wasn't it. This was the default tone. He wiped his dusty hands on his jeans and walked over to the phone. The name on the screen was Claire. He hadn't blocked her number on his lawyer's advice. Don't give her ammo to claim you're unreachable during proceedings. But he had muted her notifications. This one, however, had come through. He shouldn't look. He should forward it to Sarah and go back to unpacking. But the preview text was visible, and it wasn't the usual manipulation or plea for a meeting. "Claire, I didn't want to tell you until I was sure, but you have a right to know before we sign anything next week." Ethan's stomach turned over. The sensation was immediate and visceral, a callback to that first night in the kitchen. He unlocked the phone. There were 2 messages. The first was the text. The second was an image. He tapped the image. It was a medical document, a scan from a fertility clinic. At the top was Claire's name and yesterday's date. In the center was the grainy, grayscale image of an ultrasound. And below that, a calculated due date. Ethan did the math. He didn't want to, but his brain fired the synapses automatically. He counted back the weeks. His breath hitched. The timeline landed squarely in the month before he left. The month before the text from Julian. The month where they had tried, briefly and mechanically, to reconnect on a weekend trip to Michigan. He stared at the screen until his vision blurred. A child. For 10 years they had talked about it. Claire had always deferred, citing her career, the market, the timing. Now, in the wreckage of their marriage, it had happened. A third message popped up. 3 dancing dots transforming into text. Claire, it's a boy, Ethan, and looking at the dates, he's yours. Ethan set the phone down on the counter as if it were radioactive. The silence of the apartment, which had felt peaceful moments ago, now felt oppressive. The radiator hissed again, louder this time. The exit door he had been walking toward for 3 months just slammed shut. He wasn't just a husband leaving a cheating wife anymore. If this was true and the terrifying precision of the date suggested it might be, he was a father walking out on his son. He looked at the signed lease. It felt like a prop from a life he was no longer living. The clarity he had fought so hard to gain at the motel was gone, replaced by a muddy, suffocating gray. He wasn't free. He was tethered. They met at a coffee shop in Wicker Park, a neutral ground halfway between his new studio and their old life. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray, biting Chicago day that made the windows steam up with condensation. Claire was already there when Ethan arrived. She sat at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug of herbal tea. She wore no makeup, a calculated choice that highlighted her pale skin and the dark circles under her eyes. She looked fragile. She looked like a mother-to-be carrying the weight of the world. Ethan sat down opposite her. He didn't take off his coat. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. She didn't reach for his hand. She simply slid the manila envelope across the scratched wooden table. Ethan didn't open it. "I saw the text, Claire. I saw the scan." "He's real, Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know the timing is complicated, but I've done the math. It was that weekend in Saugatuck, before everything fell apart, before you left." Ethan looked at her. For years he had wanted this news. He had imagined the joy, the champagne, the calling of parents. Now he felt only a cold, clinical detachment. "I'm not denying the math," Ethan said. "I'm asking what you want." Claire straightened up, a flicker of her old steel returning to her eyes. "I want us to stop this nonsense. The divorce papers, the lawyers, the separate lives. We're having a son, Ethan. You can't raise a child from a studio apartment in Logan Square. You need to come home." There it was. Home. Not "I love you," not "I made a mistake," but come home. The architecture of the life she wanted to maintain required a husband, and now she had the ultimate blueprint to demand one. "Julian," Ethan said. It was the first time he had spoken the name aloud to her face. Claire flinched, just barely. "That's over. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness. It has nothing to do with this." "It has everything to do with this," Ethan said. He leaned forward, his voice low. "You aren't asking me back because you love me, Claire. You're asking me back because you don't want to explain to your clients why you're a single mother. You're asking me back because the picture doesn't look right without me in the frame." "That isn't fair," she hissed, tears spilling over. "I am trying to fix our family, for him." She pressed a hand to her stomach. Ethan looked at her hand. He thought about the man at the motel. If you let her talk you out of your own reality, you're dead. He realized then that the message hadn't changed everything in the way she intended. It hadn't pulled him back. It had severed the last thread of guilt. If he went back now, he would be teaching his son that love is a transaction, that dignity is negotiable, and that truth is secondary to appearance. "I will support the child," Ethan said, his voice steady, ringing with a finality that silenced the coffee shop chatter around them. "If he is mine, I will be a father. I will pay for everything. I will be there every weekend. But I am not coming back to the condo, and I am not coming back to you." Claire stared at him, her mouth slightly open. The fragility vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp shock. She had played her ace, and he hadn't folded. "You can't do that," she said, her voice dropping to a threat. "You walk out that door and you destroy everything." "Everything was destroyed the night you texted him while I was sleeping in the next room," Ethan said. He stood up. He didn't feel triumph. He felt a heavy, sorrowful grief for the life he had thought he would have. But beneath the grief was solid ground. "I'll have Sarah send over the co-parenting agreement," Ethan said. He turned and walked toward the door. He stepped out into the biting wind, the cold air hitting his face like a slap. He walked to his car, an older model sedan he had bought to replace the Audi. As he turned the key, he looked back at the coffee shop window. He could see Claire sitting there, frozen, a statue in a glass case. He put the car in gear and drove away. He wasn't driving back to the motel, and he wasn't driving back to the Gold Coast. He was driving into the unknown, a terrified, lonely, and completely free man.